So exams are graded and scores are posted. As I stated in the announcement, you can, if you want, take any or all of the exams again, but your score will top out at 90%. So if you already have 90 or above, it doesn't really matter. If you have an 88, you'd have to, get above a 90 to get the 90. And I don't know if it'll be worth your time, but it will be open for the next week or so for you to do that. Before you do that, I'd like to talk about a few things that will probably help clear up some issues or common errors that I saw in the responses. First topic is content validity. One, content validity has nothing to do with guessing. A lot of people were relating it to guessing. It doesn't have anything to do with it. It has nothing to do with the specific format of the questions either. I can have content validity with an essay or multiple choice or anything like that. It has nothing to do, just as if I'm teaching a lesson about science, is the lesson about science, right? Third, it's not affected by clues. Construct validity is. So in other words, if there are clues in a test, it doesn't change the fact that that test is still about science. If there's a clue in it, I'm just measuring a different construct, namely your ability to notice that the answer is highlighted or bolded or underlined or somewhere else in the test, right? So content validity is not affected by clues. Fourth, content validity is really all about whether a science test, like I said, is about science. Even if a test has high content validity, it can have bias, or it can have poor reliability, or it can have construct validity issues. It can have a whole host of things. The content validity is just one element of validity, and it has limited predictive power for all the others. So when you're looking at how things are related to validity, keep this in mind. Second topic, quality of information. One of the questions on there was about the quality of information, and in case I haven't made it clear enough, in general, the more time something takes, it takes more time because you get better information. The shorter things are, the less good the information actually is. So performance assessments, because they typically take the longest and they're the most authentic, give you the best quality of answer, quality of information. And all the way down to true and false typically takes the least amount of time to make and take, and grade for that matter. And it doesn't give you that grade of information, right? And so remember those relationships. Third thing, clues. As I stated before, it undermines construct validity. 2, it increases stability reliability, increases standard error, does not really impact alternate form inter-rater, intra-rater, okay? The way it increases stability reliability is that if you know all the answers, or I give you all the answers, you're going to get them all right every time. Whereas in a guessing situation where you don't know the answer, sometimes you'll get it right, sometimes you'll get it wrong, right? Clues also, though, even though it increases stability reliability, it will increase standard error as well, right? Because I'm getting farther away from your true score, at least conceptually. Finally, it might increase penalization bias depending on what the clue is like. It could be that really savvy test takers, so I'm measuring your test taking skills rather than your knowledge about what the test is actually about. But it doesn't really have anything to do with offensiveness bias. So that's how clues work. Next topic, homogeneous lists. This is an example of one that was in the test. It's not homogeneous in my mind in the context of those lessons because they are very distinct, different processes, right? 2 of the options say a conservation strategy, and that obviously doesn't have anything to do with invasive species or things like that. However, I could see this as science-y, related to the same general unit goal, homogeneous in that sense, and that's okay. So I'm not going to sweat the small stuff. I give everybody credit for that one. Next topic, multiple ideas in true and false format. 1, this only matters for true and false. You can have as many ideas as you want in any other question. Second, It has nothing to do with the number of terms or vocabulary or words, but rather the statements that are being made and their truth value. What you're looking for are any conjunctions or disjunctions or other statements that have two distinct parts that could each have their own truth value. So, for example, it's okay to say that the relationship between the oxpecker bird and the rhino is mutualistic, right? These are things that were in the unit, so this is a term, right? I say the word relationship, but I'm only making one claim. There's only one truth value. In this case, if I say the relationship between the oxpecker bird and the rhino is symbiotic and their relationship is mutualistic, I'm making two claims, right? One here and one here. So those can have different truth values, and that's where the problem comes in. It doesn't matter if I have multiple terms or whatever, I need some kind of separation of ideas where there will be different or potentially different truth values. Next topic, item length as a clue. Item length is only a clue if it's related to the truth value of the statements, and this really only applies to true and false and multiple choice items, because those are the select type items where length could give you the right answer. Having items of different length is okay, provided that the long statements are true and false and the short statements are true and false. If, however, all the short statements are false and all the long statements are true, then you have a problem. So item length is only a problem if it's related to getting or giving a clue to the right answer. Next topic, negative statements. It does not mean anything negative in the sense of it being mean or non-positive. It only refers to negations, so any nots or contractions of nots. So things that would say that school is stupid, that's not a negative statement in the context that we're talking about. If I said school is not stupid, now it is, right? Because I have the not or the negation in the sentence. Next topic, clear directions. When I talk about clear directions, and this is another one I was pretty lenient on and just kind of gave everyone credit for, directions should in one case, not in another. Directions should specify how the task should be carried out. In other words, we need to say what should happen in true and false and multiple choice, right? So if I have a T and an F, I should say what to do with those. I should say that they mean true and false and spelled out in the directions, even though it's usually a given. It's not always the case, and you got to learn it at some point. Second, whether things will be used more than once or not at all in matching. That should always be specified. Just because there are exact matches doesn't mean, or the same number of premises and responses doesn't mean that everything's only used more than once. So you should tell students that they can be, or whether they can be used more than once, or if anything's going to be used more than once or not at all. Finally, what symbols and labels stand for. Again, going back to the true and false statements where you're talking about a T and an F, or correct or incorrect, an I and a C. For some of you in your projects, you put an F and an S, right? Free or slave states. In that case, you really need to make sure you identify what the F and the S stand for, and I think everybody did. Same thing goes for true and false. Next one, the out of item or information in an item stem. It's really only an issue if this leads to excessive words in the options for the answers. So in other words, if I have a short stem, which of the following statements about succession is true? Or I could shorten that to what about succession is true? And then I have statements. Those statements can be a little bit longer. It's only really a problem, one, if they get really long, and some of that information could be put in the stem. So if I said something like symbiosis is blank, and then my first option said a relationship between two organisms that or in which one is helped and one is harmed, and then the next one said a relationship between two organisms in which one is harmed and one is unaffected, and so on. If I have a whole bunch of redundant information that I could have moved into the stem, then it's a problem. It's also a problem if in the case of fill in the blanks, or in some other cases of multiple choice, it opens you up to multiple answers. So if my prompt or my question is too short and I'm not giving enough clarification about what I'm looking for, that can be a problem too. Next one, blanks and clues. Blanks and clues are only a clue if the length of the blank tells you how long the word is, but the number of blanks doesn't really matter. Not a clue. Doesn't matter how many blanks I have, that's just saying this is how many terms you need to fill in. One other thing I need to clarify is the use of knowledge level goals. I used to use this synonymously with recall level goals, and I let it slip into this and didn't even notice it. Somebody emailed me, and I realized that that is confusing. A lot of people took it the right way, but I was no guarantee that if you didn't give me an answer that I thought was correct, that it was because you really didn't know or just you really didn't understand the question. So that one in the performance assessment quiz, everybody got credit for as well. To answer the question, should you, and talking about recall level goals, should performance assessments ever be used for recall level goals? The answer is not usually, only when it's the only way to go. So things like word pronunciation or reciting poems are typically your restricted performance assessments, and they are really working at lower level goals. But because they take so much time, they should be reserved for higher level stuff. When we come then to the final assessment, so this is that last thing where you had to look at the different goals for the social studies chapter and provide me with an assessment item for each goal. A couple pointers going forward to improve your score if you want to go and improve your score. A lot of them were really great, and almost all of them, I think all of them, really did have some really great parts. So I was very happy with a lot of it, but there were some things that slipped through the cracks. So for goal 1, and this is identifying or recalling, I should say, which states were free and which states were slave states. One thing that people did in some occasions was you had too much writing, too many items, or it would just take too long. So for one, if you had your students write out all the states from memory, that's going to take way too long for them to take and for you to grade, especially where you're going to have to be checking off, over 20 different states. Spelling would be an issue, penmanship would be an issue, just too many problems. So don't go that route. Another thing that happened was there was too many distractors. So a couple cases, people put in all 52 current states and had a neither column. That's kind of a waste of time in this case because the number of states that they have to identify is enough that you will get a reliable estimate even with a true-false type or a binary choice type question. So don't make this as short and sweet as possible. Another issue was too little coverage. Now, if you are wondering if they can list all the different free and slave states in 1854, the best way is to have them list them all, right? Or identify them all. You list them all and they check which are free and which are slave. Some people did way too few in the sense that I think one of you just did one, and that maybe that was just kind of to give me an idea, but I'm taking it as that's how you're assessing the goal, and just saying was Virginia a slave state or a free state doesn't really give you enough goal coverage. Now, if you're worried about time, you don't have to do them all, and you might focus on border states if you're going to reduce it. But I wouldn't reduce it really any more than 10 to 15. That might be okay, but this is if you're going to have them just check which ones are slave states and leave the free ones blank, they can go through all of them and it won't take that long if that's the goal. Third thing, need an appropriate map. A lot of people had students fill in things on a map. Now, that might not get you quite there because if I remember right, that all the things to the south are slave states and all things to the north are free states, then I don't really know anything about those specific states. I just color in, right? The stuff on the bottom one color and the top the other. But if you ask me what Florida is, I might not know where Florida is or whether it by itself is a slave state, right? And so the map might not do it unless you have them write in the name of the state and then color it in appropriately. Second thing about this is that you can't give them a color-coded map. Some of you took a little screenshot of that, and that was fine because you said that I would give them a blank map, and I'm okay with you not having to scour the internet looking for a blank map. That's fine. I don't want you to waste time doing that. But you have to say that. If you don't tell me that you would give them a blank version of the map, I'm assuming you're giving them a color-coded map. And boy, that's a big old clue right there. Right? Oh, these orange ones are all in one area and these red ones are all in a different area. I wonder if that has something to do with which are slave states and which are free states. So make sure you, if you're going to do that, make a comment saying that you will get a clear map. Another one was extraneous information. The goal is just to recall the free and slave states. Nothing else is needed about what slavery is, what a free state stands for, who the political leaders were. It's just a recall task about a basic bit of knowledge. So make sure you keep it just to that. The final thing was that it might have been unfinished. In other words, you just described what you were going to do rather than actually making the test items. And you have to make the test items because that's where a lot of these challenges come up. And so I would need to see that. So if you didn't do that, make sure you do it in the revised version. For goal number 2, right, and this was a comprehension-based goal about Kansas and the violence there. One common error that people got dinged, not a super serious one, but was that there was too much space provided for the student to answer. And what this suggested to me is that you didn't really think of what a sample answer would look like if you gave them an essay question or even a restricted essay question. A lot of you said 1 to 2 sentences. That was good. The longest would be, I could see it being about a paragraph, 4 sentences at the most. There's just not that much information. There's not that much to say, right, about why there was so much violence in Kansas. I'm not going to say it here. You gotta have to read the book to figure that out. But make sure that you structure your prompt in a way that gets students to give you the right thing, and you tell them how long it should be and keep it manageable. Second thing was basic grammar rules. Some people ended a statement with a question mark. Some, it seems like I've done this before. You're editing and you go back and change something, but you forget you have to change another part then. And it wasn't really that big of a deal, but it only matters when I couldn't figure out what you were really asking, or I could see that a student might wonder, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. So go back and reread it and look at it with fresh eyes for clarity. A third thing was a whole bunch of questions rolled together. So you might say, things like, well, what led up to the violence? Who was involved? What were the outcomes? And so on in the space below. Tell me all about this. Well, it's much easier for you if you separate those questions out and make it a series of questions. It'll be easier to grade, it'll be easier for them to answer, and you don't have to worry about a whole bunch of extra writing and transitions and things like that. Finally, some of the prompts were not specific enough in that it was a very broad statement that would probably easily allow kids to go astray and spend a bunch of time writing about things that you don't really care about, that aren't really about the Kansas-Nebraska Act and Bleeding Kansas and all that stuff. So make sure that you focus their attention on what you want them to respond with. If it was a higher level goal, like analysis, I can see that. But because it's a comprehension goal, it's kind of low level and you need to be a little more specific. Finally, the final assessment. In this one, there were some larger problems that kind of came back that I thought I had addressed in the last homework, but it came back. So just making sure that everybody gets this feedback. 1, the sub-goal issues. If you didn't have sub-goals, that was a major mark against you. So make sure you actually put your sub-goals in there. If you did have sub-goals, sometimes they weren't really broken down well. In other words, they didn't align with the major goal, which is about the events that led up to the Civil War. In order to do this well, you do need to read and understand the content in that lesson. If you're just trying to wing it and not really read it, things will be very general, and I can tell, and I can see that you haven't really thought about how to deconstruct that idea. Be specific in your sub-goals about which events or which people or which elements of this lesson are important. What are the things they need to know in order to give you a good account of those events? What are those events, right? So think about that. Second thing, sub-goals might have had little to do with the actual content and didn't really tie into the overall goal of students will be able to describe the major events leading up to the Civil War. A lot of this had to do with writing, where a bunch of sub-goals were about writing or about the task they were doing if you did a performance assessment. So students will say, I was doing a poster, students will be able to find images and place them in a poster. That is not an appropriate sub-goal for this major lesson goal, right? Because that is a task-specific thing and will lead you to a task-specific rubric. We want skill-focused rubrics, things that worry about what do they need to know, not how are they going to show me they know, but what do they need to know? What do they need to be able to do, right? So make sure you separate that out. Using a bunch of writing stuff in this, it won't work. Using a bunch of stuff that's tied to any kind of media presentation, public speech, poster board, or play won't work either. The rubric needs to be aligned with the sub-goals, and the sub-goals need to break down that major goal. So make sure you address that. That is really, really important. Can't say it enough. A final thing was that sub-goals were very vague. I should be able to tell that you know what you're talking about based on the sub-goals. So if you made a general statement like students will be able to describe the major events leading up to the Civil War and describe the major people who played a role in the Civil War, and you never mention any specifics anywhere, not in the prompt, not in the goals, not in the rubric, then I am assuming that you have not read the chapter, unfortunately. And I might be wrong, but usually it's the case. And it doesn't align well enough. I don't know what you're talking about, and that rubric becomes hyper general rather than skill focused, right? It could apply to almost any conflict. Name the major figures in the major events. So you got to get specific, okay? Finally, there was, and this is really something I've said already, a lack of alignment in some cases where you start incorporating task-specific elements about writing, grammar, punctuation, voice, and so on to a greater extent. Remember, this is social studies, it's not writing. In the rubric, make sure you stick to that goal structure, but make sure that goal structure breaks down the bigger goal. That goal structure should be about the major things they need to know in order to describe what caused the Civil War. Okay, so that's my 2 cents in feedback. If we were meeting in class, we would go over all this in class and we'd have a nice back and forth and it'd be way better. But this is as good as it gets right now. If you have any questions or you're not sure about something, let me know. Again, I will be opening the quizzes up again later this week, and they'll be open for a week. I want to make a few modifications and clarify some things that I thought were confusing and that it seemed that people took a different way, and so I usually awarded credit for what I thought were reasonable alternative interpretations. But that is that. So, hope you are all having a good week, and good luck going forward.